in snow, you know. It is so nostalgic for me because I spent so many times earlier in my ministry preaching for Bishop Abney, going through the snow over to your church, and it was just part of the revival. It would seem like the Spirit of God would not fall properly if it wasn't cold. And so it's wonderful to be here. And again, I just want to celebrate my friend and brother who is so busy and accomplished in his own rights as a pulpiteer and a pastor and a tremendous visionary, that he would take time and just hang out and ride shotgun with me, Bishop Andrew Merritt. I'm delighted to be here. He's a classy guy. Amen. I like classy people, don't you? Somewhere, the past year has been just an emotionally riveting experience for me. It has been a year filled with great heights and many accomplishments. We had the largest women's conference in the history of this country, and the Atlanta Constitutional Journal said that over the weekend, some 250,000 women from around the world attended our Woman Thou Art Loose conference there at the Georgia Dome, some of which came from Grand Rapids, incidentally. And we averaged between 85 and 90,000 women per service, and it was a great moment. I want to say to those of you that are thinking about coming this year, we'd love for you to come July 27th through the 29th back to the Georgia Dome. And I want to caution you, if you're going to come, to register early. The registration is minute. It's only $20, but it gives us a head count so that we don't have more people coming than we have seats. And we already have 25,000 women who had registered before January 1. So don't procrastinate and wait till the last minute and just come down there by faith. That's how the saints do. We just come and the Lord told me to come. I'm just here. He told me if I'd come and pray that he'd give me a seat. And it might be a lawn chair somewhere out on the sidewalk. So you need to respond. It was great moments and exciting moments, and yet it was painful moments. I lost my mother this past year, and that was to me a very traumatic experience, and it was the conclusion of a long, challenging illness that started with a dream the Lord gave me that my mother's face had twisted, and 3 days later what the Lord showed me in the dream happened while I was preaching. And we thought it was a stroke, and we did the MRIs and found out it was a brain tumor the size of a lemon. And they took my mother in to operate and did a full craniotomy on her. And I spent 9 hours in the waiting room while they cut open my mother's skull, took out the tumor the size of a lemon, and she survived the surgery. Amen. She did survive the surgery. And she told she progressed well, developed complications, had more surgeries. Long story short, 8 brain surgeries before we were through, and survived all of them, but the swelling of the brain from the surgeries aged her, and she developed Alzheimer's that she would not have normally developed for maybe 10, 15 years. And in no time at all was in my house, and spent the last year and a half of her life in my house. And if you've ever taken care of anybody who had Alzheimer's, while you were watching me on television say, get ready, get ready, get ready, I was going home in between all of that, trying to get my mother to remember how to swallow applesauce. And it was a very, very challenging time in my life, very painful time in my life. Don't ever think that anybody is exempt from pain. And you have to be careful who you say you want to be like, because you don't know what it took for them to be who they are. But I started writing this book before my mother passed, and by the time I had finished writing it, my mother had died. And so the book is called Maximize the Moment. and it's just been released by Putnam Publishing. And I just mentioned that to say that it's strange how watching somebody die helps you to evaluate life. You'd have to have done it. My mother died in my arms, listening at my tapes in her ears, holding to my hands. I can close my eyes and see her take her last breath. And it's something about going through that when you write, you write with a sense of urgency, because as you watch people you love go, you know that sooner or later you're going to go. And then you have to ask yourself a question. Since time is a fleeting vapor being expended right now, and since I'd rather you take anything from me, waste anything I have, than to waste my time. And since my time is my most precious commodity, and it is the thing that I have the least of, and since I do not know exactly how much of it I have, I seize, like a gasping man who's drowning in an ocean, gasping for breath, I seize the moments of life and maximize them. For one must ask yourself the question, what are you going to do with the time you have left? What are you going to do? Oh, I know you're going to love the Lord. I know you're going to praise him. I know you're going to love him. But what else? If you've got a vision, you better do it. If you've got a song, you ought to sing it. If there's somebody you love, you better tell them. If there's something that needs to be said, you need to say it. If you've got something you want to build, build it. If you've got somewhere you want to go, go there. For if you can, in this year 2000, and I believe this is our year, I believe this is our year. I believe, listen, let me tell you, I believe everything that we went through in the past few years was preparing us for the great crescendo of what God is going to do this year. I don't believe it was no accident that we are the generation that crossed a millennial date line and stepped into a new era and a new order. And I believe that every pain you bore in the past was a labor pain pushing you into your destiny, and something is about something radical is about to happen in your life. And so I wrote this book, Maximize the Moment, because I believe that if you can maximize every moment and minimize every liability, put away from you every hindrance and everything that stops you from focusing and everything that hinders you and every insecurity that stops you from maximizing the moment, you minimize every liability. If you can become your own coach and motivate yourself and not wait on somebody to come along and encourage you, if you can motivate yourself, if you can believe that God didn't create anybody that didn't have a gift inside of them, and dig way down beneath the rubbish of your past and manufacture the gifting of God that he placed down inside of you, and if you are bodacious enough and radical enough and sense the urgency of time enough to market what God manufactured down inside of you and say like Paul, I can do. See, the church is afraid to say what we can do. We must be humble and timid. But every now and then when you're running out of time, you don't have time to worry about how people perceive you. You got to just go ahead and say what's got to, I can do. If you can minimize your liabilities and motivate yourself and market your giftings and manufacture what God has placed down inside of you and maximize the moment, I believe that as we go into the year 2000, no good thing would God withhold from you. And there's only one other thing I want to tell you, and I want to challenge you to get a copy of this book. They're out in the lobby somewhere, but this book is not just for people. It's not really a devotional. It's not just for people who want to meditate, and it's not for people who want a souvenir. It's for people who are headed somewhere. It's an action plan for your life. And I want to say this to you, having started a church in a storefront and just a hillbilly from West Virginia who grew up in a little raggedy house that was hanging off a cliff. That's the truth. Having been a boy who grew up eating powdered eggs and powdered milk, I know you all don't know what powdered eggs are, but the little gold cans with the black writing and the nasty stuff that passed for eggs with the milk that was just as nasty as the eggs. And to being the CEO over 3 for-profit companies and being the pastor over a thriving church and television ministry and international ministry and almost 300 employees, and the father of 5 children and the author of 19 books, and have written all the lyrics for all of our songs on Sacred Love Songs, and produced a play and got it traveling all over the country. To having all of these hats to wear, I found out something, that even being blessed is difficult. And if you don't learn how to manage your life, the many variables God placed in your life will slip away from you, not for the lack of giftings, but the lack of management. The Bible said, to him whom much is given, much is required. And I really want to talk to you through this book, particularly those of you that are being blessed, about to be blessed. As God blesses you, if you don't get an order and a structure and manage your life and your time, you're going to start losing relationships and losing children and losing resources and losing time, and you won't maximize your moment. The only bad thing about getting old is to get old and look back over your life and regret that you did not maximize your moment. Put your hands together and give God a praise. I'm going to tell you, 2 or 3 times in the middle of this service, I started to just jump up and run to the mic and start preaching. When you got to worshiping and the worship fell in this place, it just did something down in my soul, because God had said something for me to minister tonight about worship. And when you started ministering worship, I've been in a worship zone. I've been out there with the Jetsons in worship, and it's my first time here, and I didn't want to blow my image, because your first time you're supposed to kind of cross your legs and look important and sit back and be distinguished. I started to just lay flat out on the floor. Because I believe that God is up to something. I believe that he's setting the stage. I don't believe that those of us who cried like we cried and endured what we endured and went without what we went without, went through all of that for nothing. I believe that the sufferings of this present world are not worthy to be compared to the glory that shall be revealed in us. I'm not talking about in heaven. I'm talking about in us. I'm not talking about on the other side. I'm talking about in us. I'm not talking about in the sweet by and by, but I mean right now. There are going to be some things that God releases in your life that you're going to look back at what you've been through, and you're going to say, I see why I had to go through that in order to get this. And you're going to be delighted and excited. Somebody help me praise him a moment in here. Glory to God. Let me get to work. They don't want me to just stand around and grin, but I could just grin at you. Oh, come, let us adore you. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. the Lord. One more time. Who can adore?